Welcome to the recorded version of Helping Seniors with Finances, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series, brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
All right, our presenter today is going to be LAKELYN HOGAN. LAKELYN is the caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. She holds a graduate certificate in gerontology and is currently working toward a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology. She also holds a Master's in Business Administration, and her undergraduate education focused on marketing and communication studies. LAKELYN has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for the University of Nebraska-Omaha's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. She is also active in her local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. LAKELYN has experience assisting senior clients and helping their families navigate the senior care continuum. She is passionate about helping others, especially aging adults and their families. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to LAKELYN HOGAN. Thank you for being here, LAKELYN.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the introduction there. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on today's webinar. We're going to be talking about a somewhat difficult topic, and that is finances. I know when it comes to seniors, finances are sometimes a touchy topic, but it's definitely important to talk about because many seniors, when they cross over into retirement, they become they have more of a fixed income or a limited income. So it's important to always keep finances in mind when it comes to seniors, especially as they're needing more and more assistance. So we're going to talk today all about finance, and let's start by looking at the objectives for today's webinar on the next slide. This webinar will give you ideas on how to support family caregivers in getting their senior loved ones financially organized. And to do so, there will definitely be a need for communication. And in today's webinar, you'll learn tips on how to help families better communicate around this topic. You'll also learn about important financial documents and tips on money management. I'll also review the average cost of care and how to talk to families about the options for financing these types of care. And then we'll also talk about fraud and ways of prevention, because fraud is something that can put a senior's finances at risk. And then, as always, I'm going to end with some resources, and I have a ton of resources today on this topic in particular, so we'll get to those at the very end. And before we start in on talking about communication around finances, I wanted to take a little poll. We started this last month. It went pretty well, so I brought it back this time. I want to know who we have on the webinar. So if Steve could pull up the slide there, go ahead and select on your screen the answer that best describes you. Are you a social worker or a discharge planner? Are you a nurse? Are you another healthcare professional not listed there? Are you a family caregiver? Or if I don't have your profession or a phrase that best identifies you, go ahead and click the Other section. And then once we get everyone's input, Steve will show us. Okay, awesome. We have a lot of social workers and discharge planners on the line today, and it looks like a lot of others. So one of these days I'm going to figure out who the others are on this webinar. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for participating in this quick poll. So now we can move on to communication. And I always like to start with communication when I talk about finances because this is such a sensitive topic, and family caregivers need to communicate with their loved one about finances. And from my experience working with senior clients, if they're able to have this conversation early on, it saves the family a lot of stress and frustration down the road. So I encourage you, when you're talking with families, to bring up financing, and the way you can tell them to best communicate around the topic of finance is to use this acronym ACT that I have here on the slide: Assess, Consider, and Talk. And these are 3 easy steps that can help families understand their loved ones' plans and wishes in terms of aging and their plans and wishes around their finances. So the first is assessing, and this means that we need to understand the senior's current situation, and that involves everything from their living situation to their health needs and potential challenges that they might see in the future. And I wanted to share a story with you about a client of mine that I worked with, and her daughter unknowingly implemented this type of communication. I kind of picked up on it as I got to know her and know her daughter. This client's name is Jodine, and when I first met with her and her daughter, Jodine, her needs were pretty basic. They were limited to just transportation and light housekeeping. But as I talked to them and got to know them, they expressed to me that they wanted to talk about their plans for Jodine's future and what it might look like. So in our discussion, we considered all of the options, and that's actually our next step, which is to consider. So in this step, we want to look at all of the options as well as the cost of these types of care. And going back to Jodine, in our discussions, she expressed to me that she wanted to stay at home as long as possible and wanted to bring in care and increase the care and assistance she was getting in order to make that dream a reality. She also informed me that she had a long-term care policy that she wanted to use. So with this information, I helped Jodine and her daughter look into that long-term care policy to see what types of services that it would cover. So when we got down the road, if we needed different types of care, we already knew what this policy would cover. And each time I met with Jodine and her daughter, we continued to talk more about her wishes, and talk is the final part of the acronym. So we need to encourage our seniors and their families to talk through the options because it's so important to know your options, to talk about them, and express those thoughts, desires, wishes to the family so everyone is on the same page. And, you know, the first and second step, the assess and consider, those can kind of be done together, but of course the third step is the most important part, that communication between the family and the seniors. So as professionals, we want to encourage our families to be talking about this matter. So again, the simple acronym of ACT can help families better communicate. And while talking about the issues might seem easy, it can actually be a little difficult. And I have some tips for communication on the next slide. When we're working with family caregivers, it's important to remember how difficult the family caregiver role can be. The family caregiver may feel that they're kind of in a role reversal situation. For so long, their parents were the caretakers taking care of them as children. They grew up through adulthood, but now these adult children are having to provide care and guidance to their parents. So it's a little bit difficult to process for some people. And at the same time, it's difficult for the senior because they're losing some of their abilities and having to come to terms with the fact that they're needing their adult children's help or their caregiver's assistance. And during this time of transition, it's important for the family caregiver to remain helpful and positive in their communication. And this is where the empathy comes into play. We need to encourage families to put themselves in their parents' shoes. Which of course is always easier said than done, but if the family caregiver can take a step back and realize what their loved one is going through, it can change the tone of the conversation. And listening is also key in communication, and especially when it comes to these tough issues like finances. And so often caregivers they don't want to listen, they just want to do. They want to do things to be helpful. But listening and seeking to understand is so important, and you can encourage family caregivers to use specific phrases that indicate their understanding. And I have a couple examples for you. The first, you could say, "It sounds like you're saying to me that you would like my brother Mike to be your health care power of attorney." Or another way you could approach it, "If I'm understanding you correctly, if you have to move out of your home, it sounds like you would like to move to Stony Brook Nursing Home." Those types of phrases can be really helpful in ensuring that the family caregiver is properly understanding the senior. And if not, it gives the senior the opportunity to say, "No, this is what I actually meant to say." So again, it's facilitating that communication around this topic. And next, you have to encourage families to take the team approach. One individual should not have to take on this conversation all by themselves. You can get other family members involved in the conversations, and it even involve professionals around the finance space to join these conversations. And we certainly don't want to forget that including the senior in the conversation is key. Many of these seniors have worked all of their lives to save for retirement, and they should have the opportunity to express their wishes in the terms of how they would like their finances to be spent and the ways that they would like to be cared for. And then finally, the family members and the seniors should stay positive and start the conversation with proactive language. This can help strengthen the communication, and again, if we're being proactive, then it can eliminate that stress and frustration down the road. So now that we've talked about communication, there's some key documents that should be part of this proactive conversation, and we're going to look at those on the next slide. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the maintaining of an estate and financial affairs is vital to a senior loved one's physical and financial health. Making sure that their investments are protected, their insurance is in order, and their taxes are paid properly will save everyone in the family from future headaches and also can provide peace of mind. I've seen it happen far too often when families wait till an emergency or a crisis situation to get all of this paperwork in order. I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. And this can result sometimes in the delay of care or a delay in the release of funds that could otherwise help support and comfort these families when they need it the most. And from a legal standpoint, I'd like to go over some documents that can assist the senior in medical or financial emergencies and as also ease the distribution of their estate at the time of death. And you're probably familiar with these documents. They're listed here on your slide, but it's always good to review. So the first of these important documents is a medical directive. It's also known as a living will or advanced healthcare directive. And this document sets out what type of care the patient wants to receive if and when they become ill or incapacitated. It's also where the do not resuscitate, or DNR, is discussed. There's also an opportunity for the senior to specify if they would like ventilator usage, artificial hydration and nutrition, if they'd like to be an organ donor, and so forth. So those types of important decisions are contained in this type of document. Next is the durable power of attorney for health care and a HIPAA release form. So a durable power of attorney for health care allows the caregiver to make health care decisions for their senior loved one, and that HIPAA release gives them access to the senior's health records and their physicians. And third is the durable power of attorney for finances, which allows the caregiver to manage their senior loved one's financial affairs, pay bills, sell property, and so forth while their loved one is still alive. It's important to note that the power of attorney for health or finance go into effect only when the physician deems the senior unable to make decisions for themselves. For example, if they're in a coma or in cases where dementia is advanced to the point where they can no longer make informed or rational decisions. So it's important that these seniors decide, again, before the crisis occurs, who they want to be making these important decisions for them, and that they've expressed to those individuals their wants, desires, and needs. And then the fourth is a irrevocable living trust, which allows the senior to retain control over his or her estate while making transfers of assets to beneficiaries. That's kind of a mouthful, but basically the senior can designate what property, such as a home, investments, jewelry, and so forth, goes into the trust and whom it will be granted to. A senior acts as the executor of their own living will during their lifetime, but an irrevocable trust has an important advantage. It allows the estate to avoid probate at the time of death. And probate is a long, drawn-out court process that decides where the senior's assets go if there are assets left after the time of death. And for some estates, it can take years. It can get really complicated. And if a person has this type of living trust, they would name a trustee and beneficiaries. And then at the time of death, that would all go into effect. And then the fifth is a will, which is somewhat similar to a living trust. I'll explain the difference here in a little bit. But a will makes clear who will receive the senior loved one's assets and personal property at the time of death. A properly written will help to avoid disagreements over the parent's estate after death. Wills do not have to reflect your wishes. Sorry, I apologize. Let me back up there. So the will is, of course, important, and certain states have different laws concerning wills. So you definitely want to check with your particular state. And there's a really great website that will help you with this, and it will also walk you through the process. It's called agingwithdignity.com, and on there is the 5 wishes document. Again, that's agingwithdignity.com, so it can help walk you through these key documents that are important for a senior to have. Again, agingwithdignity.com, and it's the 5 wishes. Okay, so now that we've reviewed these key documents, we're going to move along to the next slide. These key documents can be very confusing and sometimes overwhelming for individuals, so it's important to have a team of professionals together to help with these types of decisions. And we'll go over that financial management team here in a little bit, but we have some great money management tips here. So let's say the caregiver visits their parents and notices unopened bills, a desk in disarray, and bank statements that are piling up. Perhaps it's time for this family to broach the subject of helping with the day-to-day management of the senior's finances. For those with Alzheimer's or dementia, one of the early signs of cognitive impairment comes to light because the senior is having difficulty writing checks and managing the finances. So that could be, again, an indicator that there's some cognitive impairment. But one of the ways that we can help seniors with the money management is to encourage families to assist with their online banking. And if the parents agree, the caregivers can get permission to access their online banking to pay bills and help with the financial management of their estate. And taking care of these tasks can be easily accomplished from the comfort of a caregiver's home, and it can provide a much-needed relief for parents. The caregiver will need to arrange a visit to the banking institution with their parents to fill out some forms that allow them to have access to their accounts and make changes on their behalf. If a senior parent is insistent on managing their own finances, the caregiver shouldn't argue, but instead try to find solutions that will work for them. For example, they could see if their parents would be willing to hand off those activities to a member of their professional services team, such as an accountant. At the very least, caregivers should see if their parents would allow them to help get their financial files organized. And maybe that's that pile of bills and bank statements that are piling up. It could be so overwhelming that the senior is just avoiding getting it organized. So if the caregiver sees that their parents are willing to accept help, it may help to prioritize these documents for immediate payment and then help them file away those that need later attention. It's also good to make a list of their accounts and stay organized and on top of things. That way, if something were to happen, they would be easily accessible. If possible, when helping to organize the finances and bills, encourage the family caregivers to make copies or, again, file away those important documents, such as wills, trusts, and medical directives, those key documents that we just spoke of. That way, they'll be able to access the forms quickly and easily. And I mentioned earlier that money management for those that have cognitive impairments can be especially difficult. And according to dementia experts, and the victims' families, the problems are often more serious than just forgetting how to balance their checkbook or write a check. People suffering from dementia have misread how much money is in their accounts or how much money they owe on taxes. They've even told their brokers to buy when they meant to sell. And they've fallen victim to fraudulent payments. So what can caregivers do? If you're working with a family, you want them to know as soon as the parents start showing signs of forgetfulness or as soon as they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, then they should get to work on getting their financial affairs in order and also that financial power of attorney. That way, if they were to progress in the disease, the proper means are in place. And that kind of incapacity can come quickly depending on the individual and depending on their type of dementia. And the key documents, again, like I mentioned earlier, can be really confusing and overwhelming. So we can suggest to families that they assemble a team of professionals to help them. And we're going to look at that financial management team here on the next slide. There are several key professionals that seniors and their families should consider including as part of their financial management team. The first of these is an attorney, and this will help with legal matters and help to execute those key legal documents. And if a family cannot afford this type of service, many communities have free legal services, and many states have a legal aid. A financial planner or investment counselor is another important member of the team. A certified financial planner, or CFP, is generally a safe bet. A family should first determine if their senior has an advisor, and if not, they might consider finding one. Certified financial planners are regulated by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and there's a website where families can check certification statuses of planners and also read reviews to help them find the best planner that fits their needs. And if they do have a financial planner, it's important to encourage families that they check on the status of their investments regularly and touch base with this advisor on a regular basis. If a financial planner can also assist with making determinations about health and medical funding options. The next member of the professional services team is an insurance counselor. And beyond health insurance, the caregiver could ask the counselor about the pros and cons of long-term care insurance and whether their parents have enough or need additional life insurance coverage. The insurance counselor can also provide guidance on insurance investment vehicles and work with their investment advisor to see if these opportunities make sense for the parent's financial situation. And the final person to include as part of the financial management team is a CPA or tax advisor. It's easy for anyone to get tripped up by the new and current tax laws. A senior loved one may be receiving certain funds or payouts that require them to pay quarterly tax payments. And if they're not paid in a timely fashion, the senior could be subject to penalties that could deplete their resources. And tax deferrals are hard to understand, and managing their taxes is so key. So the cost of hiring a tax professional might be a wise investment over paying these fines and penalties that could have been avoided. And it also helps to lessen the stress of family caregiver and help to avoid having to be audited by the IRS. So now that we know how to advise families on lining up a professional financial management team, we're going to switch gears a bit and start talking about the different types of care and the cost of care. But first, I want to get another poll going. I want to know what percentage of people over the age of 65 will need long-term care, and this is in the U.S. So go ahead and select the percent of people you think over the age of 65 will need long-term care. And we have several options: 55%, 70%, 86%, or 91%. So go ahead and take your best guess here. We'll see what everyone comes up with. %70 is the answer, so that was the majority. Way to go, everyone. All right, so let's jump ahead to the next slide. And according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 70% of people age 65 and older will require long-term care during their lifetime, and 75% of people age 85 and older have long-term care needs as of now. And I've seen this number reported even higher in other studies and reports. Some consider more of those chronic conditions to play into those higher numbers. But there definitely is a growing need for long-term care, and there's also an expected increase in the expenses of long-term care. And it's estimated that spending will increase nearly 4 times by the year 2040, and that'll be about $380 billion. And this may or may not seem like a shocking number to you. I know it was to me. But the truth is so often people underestimate the cost of care because many people just assume Medicare or Medicaid will pay for everything. And I'm sure you guys have had this type of conversation with seniors, maybe even on a daily basis. But as professionals, we need to better understand the cost of care so that we, again, can help educate families and seniors on these costs. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the different types of care on the next slide. I wanted to review 5 main areas of care that seniors might need to finance, and they're listed here on the slide. And I'm going to walk through each of these in the continuum of care and talk about the average costs. And the costs on the following slides, they come from a Genworth study. It's called the Cost of Care Study, which was done in 2014. So it's just a couple years old, but the numbers are still pretty accurate. And again, these are just average costs and could be more or less depending on where the seniors live. So let's take a look at the first of these on the next slide, and that's companionship services. Companionship services make it possible for people to live in their own homes. This type of assistance could help the senior complete household tasks that they cannot manage on their own anymore. These might include things such as light housekeeping, some meal preparation, running errands for the senior, basically hands-off types of care. So the hourly rate for this type of care is about $19 an hour. And again, it might vary depending on where you live. And then the next type of care is a little more hands-on. So let's take a look at that on the next slide. Personal and home health aides help people living at home with more of, again, that hands-on care. And typically, hands-on care means personal care, but not medical care. This could include tasks such as bathing, grooming, restroom assistance, those types of activities. And the average hourly rate for this would be $20 per hour, and this number is based on a non-Medicare certified licensed agency. So again, about $20 an hour for this type of care. So another type of care is adult daycare, and that's on the next slide. So adult day services provide social and related support services in a community-based protective setting. And this care occurs during any part of the day, but it's not 24-hour care. And these types of centers can offer much-needed break for the caregivers. A variety of programs usually include socializing, supervision, and structured activities designed for the individual's needs. Some programs also provide personal care, transportation, medication management, social services, meals, personal assistance, and therapeutic activities. And the average cost for this type of care is about $65 a day. And I had one client who we worked with. We helped get her to and from the adult day center while her daughter worked. So this is a nice option for family caregivers. Again, gives them a nice needed break. But again, that's about $65 a day for this type of adult daycare. And then when a senior decides to move out of the home, one option is assisted living, and we're going to look at that on the next slide. And assisted living can provide personal care and health services for people who may need assistance with their activities of daily living, or ADLs. And while assisted living is not an alternative to a nursing home, it is an intermediate intermediate level of long-term care. And these types of facilities provide, again, personal care, meals, some limited transportation, medication management activities, and so forth. And the average monthly rate for an assisted living facility is $3,500 per month. And again, just an average. Even in my local community, there's a range of assisted living prices based on the facility, the location, the amenities, that sort of a thing. But this, again, just kind of gives you an average, a starting point for talking with families. And before we move on to the highest level of care, I wanted to do another quick poll, because I want to know what you think the national average daily rate is for a skilled nursing facility. In the skilled nursing facility, remember, it's around-the-clock care. So again, this is the daily rate. Do you think it is $123 a day, $179 a day, $212, or $306? So again, we're talking the average daily rate for a skilled nursing facility. So go ahead and take your best guess, and we'll see what everyone says. You guys are good. Oh, you do have my slides right in front of you to look ahead to the next one. I didn't consider that. But anyway, $212 a day. So we'll move on to the next slide here and talk a little bit more about that skilled nursing facility. But yeah, the average daily rate for a skilled nursing facility is about $212 a day, and I did a little quick math, and that's close to $6,500 per month. And skilled nursing facility provides a higher level of supervision and care than those assisted living facilities. They offer residents personal care assistance, room and board, supervision, medication. Many of them offer therapies and rehabilitation and skilled nursing care 24/7, so 24 hours a day. So again, that is the highest level of care, and it also is most likely going to be the most expensive level of care. And when we're talking about all of these different types of care, Medicare covers some of these services, but even with that Medicare coverage, the senior is generally still responsible for a significant portion of the expenses. So that's something to keep in mind when talking with families. And also, those assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, those are full-time expenses, and more than likely, if the senior is living in those places full-time, they will move out of their homes and maybe have to even sell their homes. So another thing to keep in mind. And let's take a look at paying for these type of services on the next slide. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of people assume that Medicare, Medicaid will pick up the bill for these services. And there are several studies and articles out there that indicate people have not even thought about who pays for care. And so let's talk about the options. And the first is self-insure, which is just a fancy way for saying out-of-pocket or private pay. And a good portion of care is paid privately. The next is the long-term care insurance. And this has become increasingly popular as a way to fund senior care. And in fact, 8 million Americans are now covered under these types of policies. And actual plans can be written for in a variety of ways to provide a range of benefits. And since the introduction of long-term care, it's changed quite a bit. For example, I've seen some older policies that do not have coverage for home care services, and that really wasn't even an industry back when they bought their policies. So some of these can be renegotiated to cover these types of care, but regardless, it's very important for families if they're considering the purchase of a long-term care policy that they look into what is and is not covered. And these insurance companies, they're also trying to come up with new products and ways to finance care. And I recently read about one, Genworth. They have a new, it's not called long-term care insurance, but it's a very similar concept. It's called a medically underwritten annuity. So if you're interested in reading up on that, again, it's a medically underwritten annuity. So all sorts of funding options that these insurance companies are trying to come up with to make care more affordable. So again, the rule of thumb when considering these plans is to ensure what is and is not covered, and then it's always good to seek the advice of a professional, such as an insurance agent or financial advisor, when looking at these types of policies. And we talked quite a bit already about Medicare and Medicaid, and I know most of you are probably familiar with these programs, especially for those social workers and discharge planners out there. But I wanted to go over them briefly because sometimes families get them easily confused. So first, both Medicare and Medicaid are considered entitlement programs. Medicare is deemed as a health insurance plan for seniors, and it's available to them around the age of 65. And to qualify, a senior must have paid into Social Security through their employment for at least 40 quarters or 10 years. And Medicare was not originally intended to pay for chronic conditions or long-term care, which is what a lot of seniors currently need. It was actually designed for more of those acute care episodes. So there's two parts of Medicare. Part A and Part B. You probably hear a lot about that. And Part A is considered hospital insurance. So it covers inpatient stays, skilled nursing, and hospice care. And Part B was designed as a supplemental insurance, and that part is voluntary. So this program requires individuals to pay a monthly fee that covers physician services, lab tests, durable medical equipment, and some therapeutic services. And there are, and these are called Medigap policies, and they are a supplement to Medicare. And there are about 10 different standardized policies out there, so it's important for the senior to review all those policies and pick the one that's best for them. For example, some cover medical expenses or emergencies overseas, while some do not. So if the senior is a traveler, they might want to pick one that does. And then there's also an alternate Medicare Advantage plans, and they are more of a private insurance alternative to Medicare's traditional deductible and copay system. This does not require that Medigap policy, but some Medicare Advantage plans have a small monthly premium, and they often cover things that Medicare typically does not, such as dental and vision, but these policies at the same time might limit the physicians that the individual can go to. They might have to be within the network of physicians. So that's just a snapshot of Medicare. It's a very complicated system, so that I'm sure there's far more I could dive into, but I'll leave it at that and switch to Medicaid. And this program, again, often confused with Medicare, but they're both healthcare programs, but Medicaid is a means-tested welfare program designed to help lower income and disabled of all ages, including the elderly. And for those over 65, it can pay for nursing home costs once they've exhausted all or most of their own means. And typically, Medicaid eligibility comes into play after the family spends down a senior's assets until there's only about $2,000 left. And federal and state Medicaid laws have changed in recent years to restrict and penalize any efforts by seniors or their families to artificially impoverish themselves, which means spending down their assets or giving their money away to their children or charities in order to qualify for Medicaid. So again, two different things there, Medicare, Medicaid. And then one final source of payment for care is the Veterans Assistance, or the VA, and 1 in 3 seniors in the country is a veteran or a surviving spouse of a veteran. That was a large number. I didn't know that when I was doing my research. And veterans and their surviving spouses might be eligible for a VA benefit called Pension with Aid and Attendance. And this benefit may provide reimbursement funding to help cover medical expenses, including some types of care that I've talked about today. So millions of qualifying veterans and families go without this benefit simply because they're not aware of it. So to see if they qualify, they can always check with their local VA, and I have that on the resources slide towards the end. So now that we talked about some ways that we can finance this care, I wanted to point out some questions that seniors and their families should ask before choosing a type of care or funding source. We're going to look at that on the next page, or slide, pardon me. So it's important to identify if the funding source meets the needs of the senior and is within their financial means. It's also important to get all of their questions answered and bring those professional advisors in as needed. And they need to choose a care provider, when they choose their care provider, they should make sure that they have a contact within that organization that the family can reach out to if a concern or question arises. And it's always important to encourage families to do their due diligence, their fact-finding on that provider. Nowadays with the Internet, it's so easy to access online reviews or testimonials. There's even websites such as Nursing Home Compare, where you can look at different nursing homes and how they rank or how their state reviews go. So lots of resources out there, but again, these are some good questions to encourage family members to ask throughout this whole funding solutions conversation. And before we jump into senior fraud, because again, we know that fraud can compromise a senior's financial situation if they fall victim to it. I have a quick poll, one last poll here. We're going to pull that up. And I want to know which of the following reasons that a senior might be a target for fraud. Is it availability, sickness, because they're less likely to report the fraud, because they're polite and trusting, or all of the above? So go ahead and select the one that you think is the best answer as to reasons why seniors might be a target for fraud. And we'll see what everyone has to say. I had a feeling everyone would pick all of the above. So everyone else was right, too. They are less likely to report, and they are polite and trusting. So we're going to look at those reasons and a few more on the following slide. And there are a number of national organizations and law enforcement agencies that list these similar conditions or factors as to why seniors may be at risk or be victims of fraud. And again, availability. Seniors are a target because they're retired, less mobile, they're at home more often, more available for fraud. People who are seeking to target them as frauds. And then isolation. They're also alone sometimes because they've moved away from family or family has moved away from them. They might have little interaction with loved ones, and they're isolated. So when someone is friendly, they might be more willing to pick up the phone. So loneliness also plays into this, especially if the person is kind of a regular. Oftentimes, those that prey on seniors in terms of fraud will develop a friendship or relationship and then use those vulnerabilities of the senior to take advantage of their financial means. And then also sickness. Chronic health issues means that older adults might not be able to maintain their property. And so scam artists know that and know to look out for homes that have a yard that the grass is overgrown, the weeds are kind of taking over the landscaping. So they seek out those individuals and could offer to do their yard work and way overcharge them, or say that they'll help to fix parts of their house and then take the money and never end up fixing the roof or whatnot. And also the prosperity. Money is one of the most notable reasons for the reason why seniors are so vulnerable. Scammers see them as a supply of wealth, including their homes, property, life savings, and they also have really great credits. They're easily approved for financing. And then finally, that polite and trusting. So seniors are again, friendly to those callers, people dropping by. And then finally, they're less likely to report. And the FBI says that older Americans are less likely to report fraud because, one, they don't know who to report to. Two, they might be ashamed. And three, they might not even know they've been scammed. And they also might think that their relatives will question their mental capacity and their ability to manage their financial affairs if they admit to fraud. So again, those are important to keep in mind as to why seniors might be a target. And then there's a couple types of fraud that are most common that we need to warn families about. And the first are those prizes and sweepstakes. I'm sure I've even gotten this type of mail saying that you've won and that you just need to send a check to cover the taxes. Oftentimes these turned out just to be scams, so be wary of that. Again, home improvement frauds. They look for ways to help fix the senior's house. Again, either overcharge them or not even show up to fix it at all. Phishing schemes are another. Seniors might receive a call claiming that they're a bank or the IRS, and they say that if they don't wire this amount of money in time, that they will be arrested or fined. So watch out for those types of situations. And internet fraud. Sometimes people are unfamiliar with how to use the internet or enter their credit card information on an unsecured site, so they could fall victim to a scam in that regard. And then also identity theft. People who give their birth date and social security number to someone that calls. That's something that might happen, and so it's best to advise the senior not to give out that information unless they're the one making the call. If they have to call their insurance company and provide that information or something of that sort, but they should not give that information to anyone who calls them. So now that we know some common types of scams, let's look at how to prevent this fraud on the next slide. And we're running a little low on time. I apologize. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly so we can get to some questions. But according to the National Council on Aging, there's 8 steps that can help seniors avoid being scammed. Again, just be aware of the risks. Encourage the senior to stay connected with friends and family. It could reduce that loneliness, and if people are checking in regularly, they might be able to pick up on any fraudulent activity or offers that might come in the mail. Also, ask for everything in writing. If a senior is convinced that, somebody called and said that they won a prize, tell the senior to ask for all of it in writing. Oftentimes it's a scam and they're never going to send you anything in the mail. So that's one way to prevent that fraud. And then shred important documents. Many communities, I know my community has a shredding day where you can drop off boxes of paper to be shredded in a secured shredder. Or you can purchase a shredder for the senior, but that can help to reduce identity theft. Also, the Do Not Call list. You can visit donotcall.gov, and you can sign up for this list, and you could schedule it twice a year. You could schedule it once in the fall, once in the spring, but doing this regularly will hopefully help reduce the number of fraudulent calls the senior will get. And again, don't give any personal information over the phone unless the senior is making the call. And then be wary of unsolicited offers. People, again, coming up to your door saying that they will fix your roof. Just be wary of those types of offers. And then on the next slide, let's look at what happens if you think that the senior has been scammed. We can advise families to call their local law enforcement and then also contact their financial institutions. So if the bank account has been compromised, cancel the account, cancel the credit card immediately. And then contact the local Better Business Bureau. They might be able to advise you on what to do, or they can take note of that fraud, and it can help prevent other seniors from being victims of the same fraud. And the FBI has a number of tips on their website. You can go to fbi.gov to find those tips, and just again be aware, because if we're aware of these types of frauds, hopefully we are less likely to fall victim to them. So I know I've gone over a lot of information, so I'm going to go over some resources quickly. I want to transition to the next slide so you can see some of the resources that I've mentioned. That Certified Financial Planner's website is up there. We also, on caregiverstress.com, there's also a funding solutions guide. All those little charts that I showed earlier on the cost of care, you can find those same charts if you go to caregiverstress.com, search for funding solutions guide. On that same site, there's also an aging plan that helps seniors and their families talk about ways that the senior wants to age, the options. So it's just a good kind of step-by-step conversation starter around a lot of what we've talked about today. Again, Genworth Financial, you can get that cost of care study through genworth.com. You can also look up that annuity that I mentioned earlier. And then AARP has a great guide to public benefits, helps you understand your state's benefits. Also, there's a health cost calculator on there, and then also resources on finding legal assistance. So AARP is another great site to visit. And then there's a few more resources on the next slide. I mentioned the National Council on Aging earlier. They have a great benefitscheckup.org website where you can find medicine, food, and prescription assistance options. And then I talked a lot about veterans assistance, and that's the website, caregiver.va.gov, or you can call that number, to, again, see if the senior would qualify for any benefits for care. And then also the Federal Trade Commission, when it comes to fraud, they have a great Pass It On program. So you can Google Pass It On. And again, this is all about fraud prevention. And if you want to learn more about fraud prevention, I did a webinar on it earlier in the year. You can go back and listen to that. And then finally, I wanted to give some resources for low-income seniors on the next slide. We talked a lot about the different types of care, and some seniors simply cannot afford care. So these are some resources, some ways that you can help those seniors. Visit your local area agency on aging. There's different options for rent subsidies, utility company discounts, tax advantages. There's prescription drug assistance. For housing options, you can go to HUD.gov. And then also there are different health fairs where seniors can go and get their blood pressure checked, some basic services like that, their blood sugar checked. So those are some free services that a senior could take advantage. And then finally, there are grant programs out there, especially for those with Alzheimer's and dementia. There is a national program called Hilarity for Charity. That's respite care grants in the home for those with Alzheimer's disease. And then most Alzheimer's associations on the local level have different types of grants for care. So always remember those as options as well. And I'm going to just, on the next slide is a summary of what we talked about today. Just going to throw that up there while we go to questions. So Steve, if you want to start with questions, I apologize everyone for going over. I had so much information to go over and didn't want to rush through it. So I apologize if I talked fast, but we'll go ahead and open it up for questions now.
All right, thanks a lot. No problem at all, LAKELYN. Let's get to these questions. LAKELYN, just wanted to put out a correction. Earlier you were talking about Aging with Dignity, the website. Agingwithdignity.com is actually not the right address. It's agingwithdignity.org.
Oh, thank you for catching that. I apologize.
No problem. Just a couple notes on that, everybody. Thanks for pointing that out for us. The first question here for you, do you have any current data or information on the increasing financial exploitation of older adults by their own family members? And what would you do in a situation like this to demonstrate or prove this exploitation?
You know, that's a great question. Off the top of my head, I don't have any stats on that, but I know that that does occur. And it's a difficult situation to broach because a lot of times the senior is afraid to admit to someone other than the person that is being fraudulent or taking advantage of the finances of a senior, because they don't want their caregiver, the one that is taking money from them or financially abusing them, to deny them care or provide, how do I phrase this? Basically, they don't want to stop receiving care from that individual. They don't want to upset that individual. Sometimes the senior may think, oh, well, they need it, so it's okay if they take it. And they might not realize just how much they're taking and how it's financially hurting them and preventing them from getting the services that they need. So again, it's a very difficult conversation to broach. If you can bring in a third party, if you can bring in a professional to sit down with the senior and explain to them why they would need to address and stop the financial exploitation, it's always good to hear it from somebody outside of the family. But again, it's a very difficult situation to broach, and they also, in many situations, don't want to press charges against the individual, and sometimes as a last resort, that might be necessary to stop the fraudulent activity from happening. So I know that the FTC and has some good resources. The Pass It On campaign through the FTC has some good information. And off the top of my head, again, I don't know any hard statistics, but I can look into that. And if I find any hard statistics, I can always add that to next month's webinar.
Great. Okay. Next question here, LAKELYN. What about a senior who is alone, no children, siblings, spouse, etc.? How do key documents come into play in a situation like that?
That is difficult. And every now and I've run into that situation before. If the individual has no families nearby, if there is a trusted friend or confidant that they would feel comfortable assigning as, their healthcare power of attorney or financial power of attorney, that's always an option. If there's absolutely no one, in many cases the state can appoint a guardian, and that in that case the state-appointed guardian would be able to help make those decisions if it were to come to it at the end. And I'm trying to quickly do a Google search to see. I know that there's guardianship.org that has some information on that guardianship program, but each state kind of does it differently. So you'd want to check with your local state to see exactly how that process works. But again, my suggestion would be to first try to find a friend to help with those decisions. But if there's no one left, that guardianship, that state-appointed guardianship.
All right. LAKELYN, can you tell us the major differences between a living trust and a living will?
Yes. I realized I said I was going to do that, and I kind of skipped over it. I apologize. So let me go back to that slide here just so I have my notes in front of me. It's kind of a little bit complicated to explain. So a living trust, it protects the assets. So it's there's a set of legal documents that will be put into place for a living trust, and it's appointed a trustee. So when the person passes away, then the trustee is in charge of carrying out that trust, disseminating the assets of that trust. And then a will is a written document where the person go ahead or just lays out that, I want my car to go to this person. I want any of my remaining money to be given to this charity. So from my understanding, and I'm not a certified financial planner or an attorney, I would definitely suggest that you consult a lawyer or attorney that specializes in these types of aging documents. But the will, pretty much anyone can write and get notarized. A trust, if there's a little more complication to it, and most likely need to advise an attorney to get that sort of thing set up. So I apologize for not doing an awesome job of explaining that, but again, I would consult an attorney for more details on the differences.
All right. Well, LAKELYN, we have reached the end of our hour here, and unfortunately we are out of time for today, but I want to thank you again for joining us for another great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.